A grown man sits on a couch, wrapped in a towel that barely reaches around him. He weighs almost 300 pounds. On the table in front of him, a chocolate shake and a half-empty box of donuts. He just got home from the graveyard shift, spraying poison for roaches and rats in the back kitchens of other people's restaurants, all night, the only job he can stand to show up for. And right now, he can't move. He's staring at the television. On the screen, men are being punished by the ocean, freezing, crawling through wet sand, quitting one by one. Navy SEAL training, Hell Week, and something inside this soft, exhausted man goes very still. He is looking at the hardest thing on earth and thinking, I want that. Here's what you need to know. Within a few years, this same man will be called the hardest human alive, not because he was gifted, but because he uncovered something the rest of us spend our whole lives running from. 2 words will come out of all of it: stay hard. By the end, you'll know exactly what they cost. This is David Goggins. Rewind. A boy of 6 or 7 stands in a big house in a nice part of Buffalo, wearing clothes that cost more than the neighbors. From the street, the Goggins family looks like they've made it. His father, Trunnis, owns a roller skating rink. There's money. There are cars. But inside that house and inside that rink, the boy is not safe. His father rules by fear. The children work for no pay and sleep almost none. The money stays in one man's pocket. And when anyone falls short, the punishment is violence. David grows up watching the 2 people he loves most get hurt, learning to read a grown man's mood the way other kids read cartoons, because getting it wrong has a cost. So the boy becomes an actor. He smiles at school. He performs fine. He learns, before he can even read well, the most dangerous skill of his life: how to hide. That skill will nearly ruin him. But first, it saves him. One night, his mother makes a decision that takes more courage than anything her son will attempt for decades. She takes her 2 boys and runs. They land in Brazil, Indiana, a small town at his grandparents' with almost nothing. $123 a month, counting pennies for milk. They traded terror for poverty. But Brazil hands David a new kind of pain, and this one has his name on it. He is one of the only black kids for miles. He finds a threat scrawled in his own school book. He walks out one morning to a slur painted across his car. Hate groups are active a few towns over. The message is everywhere: you don't belong here. And here's the quiet catastrophe underneath it all. The boy who learned to hide is falling apart in school. He can't really read, so he does what he's always done. He fakes it. He copies. He performs. And for a while, it works. Then the lie runs out. As a teenager, David tries to enlist. The military gives him a test, the ASVAB. And the performing, the copying, the hiding, none of it can help him now. He scores a 20. He gets pulled aside and told in so many words that he isn't smart enough. Around the same time, the one gentle father figure he'd found is taken from him, killed. Loss on top of humiliation. David is standing in the wreckage of every shortcut he ever took, and for the first time, there's no one to fool and nowhere to hide. Most stories would call this rock bottom, but rock bottom isn't a feeling. It's a choice about what you do next. And on this night, alone, this 17-year-old is about to invent the strangest, simplest tool you have ever heard of. It starts with a fogged-up bathroom mirror. He wipes the steam off a cheap, corroded mirror and looks at the person in it. He does not like what he sees. A kid who lies to himself. A kid who quits. A kid full of excuses about a hard life. Every one of them true, and none of them helping. So he stops lying. Out loud to his own reflection, he tells himself the brutal truth. You're not a victim. You're a coward right now, today, and you're the only one who can change it. Nobody is coming to save you. Then he does something about it. He shaves his head. He writes his goals on sticky notes and tapes them to the glass. Read at a real level. Pass the test. Get out. He calls it the accountability mirror, and it is the hinge of his entire life. Because for the first time, he isn't performing for anyone. He's reporting to the one judge he can't con. He passes the test on the 3rd try. His reading climbs years and months. The hiding is over. Or so he thinks. Because here's the trap. You can win the war with yourself once, and lose the very next battle. David joins the Air Force. He wants the elite rescue units. And deep into the brutal water training, cold and gasping, he reaches for an excuse, a medical trait, a reason to stop that sounds legitimate, and he takes it. He quits. He tells himself it was the smart call. It wasn't, and he knows it. That old skill from childhood, the hiding, the story that lets you off the hook, it never really left. It was just waiting for a hard enough day. So he drifts. He leaves the service. He gets a job knocking out rats at night, and the pounds pile on, 240, 270, closing on 300. The man who once faced down his own reflection has stopped looking at it altogether, which brings us back to that couch, and that towel, and a documentary about the hardest training on Earth. He calls a Navy recruiter the next day. The conversation is short and merciless. To even attempt SEAL training, he has to make weight. He steps on the recruiter's scale, 297 pounds. The maximum they'll take him at is 191. That's 106 pounds. In the next class, his only realistic shot is under 3 months away. Every reasonable person in that room knows it's impossible. Losing 100 pounds safely takes most people a year. He has weeks. And this is the moment the whole book turns on. Not the finish line, the starting line. Because David doesn't ask whether it's possible. He asks a different question. The question that will define him. How much am I actually willing to suffer? He goes home. He puts on an old movie, a beaten fighter, refusing to fall in the 14th round, and a man who can barely jog to the end of the street laces up his shoes. What follows is not a montage. It's punishment on purpose every single day. He runs until he can't, then walks, then runs again. He bikes for hours. He trains twice a day and eats like a man defusing a bomb. The first day, he makes it 400 yards. 400 yards, and he's done. But he goes back. And here's what he'd want you to notice. He never waited to feel motivated. Motivation, he'll tell you flatly, is unreliable garbage. It shows up on the easy days and vanishes on exactly the ones that count. What he built instead was colder and far more durable. Discipline. You go when you don't want to, especially then. And back. 25 pounds gone in the first weeks, then more, then more. Under 3 months later, he steps on a scale and reads a number he had no business reaching, 191 pounds. He lost a small adult. He made the weight. And here's the part most people miss, the part he wants you to feel. That wasn't the achievement. That was the door. On the other side of it stood the hardest military training in the world, and it was about to teach him that everything he thought he knew about his own limits was a comfortable lie. Bud S. Coronado, and it does not go clean the first time. A lung infection rolls him out of one class and sends him back to the start of the worst week of a SEAL's life. So he does it again. Hell Week is days without sleep, hauling boats and logs, sitting in surf so cold your body starts shutting down. The instructors are hunting for the ones who will break, and they are very good at their job. And this is where David finds a weapon in his own head. When they try to break him, he decides to break them first, to be so relentlessly, impossibly positive under punishment that the instructors lose the will to keep pushing. Smile in the cold. Ask for more. Take their power. He calls it taking souls. His boat crew feels it. Freezing, half dead, they start chanting one line into the dark. You can't hurt boat crew 2. And for the first time in his life, David Goggins is not hiding from pain. He's feeding on it. He becomes a SEAL. But he doesn't stop there, and the reason matters. Most people, once they've proven something, coast. David does the opposite. He goes looking for the fire again and again on purpose. He goes through Hell Week, not once, but 3 separate times. The third time on legs already fractured, shins taped, running on bone that's begun to crack, refusing to be pulled. Ask him why, and he'll give you a strange, unglamorous answer. He isn't chasing trophies. He's building calluses. Not on his hands, on his mind. His idea is simple and almost primal. A mind, like skin, gets tougher exactly where it's been torn. Every time you do the thing you dread, every time you stay when everything screams leave, You lay down another layer of scar tissue over the soft place that wants to quit. Suffering isn't the price of the goal. Suffering is the training. But even a calloused mind he's about to learn can be built on a cracked foundation. Here's the turn nobody expects from the toughest man in the room. All that armor, and one day it isn't enough. Because you can callous the surface all you want, but if the ground underneath is broken, the whole thing still shakes. So David does the bravest thing in the entire book, and it has nothing to do with cold water or barbed wire. He goes back to the boy in the violent house, back to the slur on the car and the threat in the school book, back to every wound he'd armored over instead of healed. He stops running from his past and turns around to face it directly. This is the insight most just be tougher stories never reach. Toughness that's only a mask is fragile. It protects the wound and keeps it open. Real strength meant going to the source of his fear and making peace with it. Only then was the armor bulletproof. And only then was he ready to find out how far a healed, calloused mind could actually push a human body. The answer arrives as a dare he probably shouldn't have taken. To raise money for the families of fallen teammates, David enters a 24-hour race. Run as far as you can. He signs up with 3 days' notice and essentially no training. The distance he ends up covering, 101 miles, on foot, in about a day. His body does not forgive it. Somewhere in the last miles, his system begins to fail. His kidneys shutting down, his legs gone, his own body in open revolt. He finishes anyway, and then nearly collapses on his kitchen floor, wrecked in ways that will take weeks to undo. It was reckless. He'll tell you that himself. But buried in that ruined night was a discovery worth more than any medal, a mental tool he reached for at the exact moment he had nothing left. He calls it the cookie jar, and it's the reason he kept moving when every signal in his body was ordering him to stop. Picture a jar in your mind. Into it, you drop every hard thing you have ever survived. Every time you were counted out and stayed in, every finish line you had no right to reach. The childhood, the scale, the 3 hell weeks, each one a cookie. Then, on the day your body is screaming and your mind is begging to quit, you reach in. You pull one out, and you remind yourself, with evidence, not hope, I have been here before, and I did not break. Who are you to tell me I can't? That's the cookie jar. It sounds almost childish until you're at your limit and it's the only thing holding you up. And notice what it really is. It's the accountability mirror grown up. The same refusal to lie to yourself, except now the truth cuts the other way. Back then, the mirror said you're capable of more. Now the jar says you've already proven it, which sets up the single most important idea in this entire book. It's the idea he built his life around, and it goes like this. When your mind first says stop, I'm done, I can't, this is it, you are almost never actually done. In David's estimate, you're at about 40% of what you've got. 40. There's a governor in your head, like the one in a car engine that caps the speed long before the machine would truly fail. It's not there to hurt you. It's there to keep you comfortable and safe, and it fires way too early. He calls it the 40% rule. Most of us quit the instant it feels hard and call that our limit. It isn't. It's a suggestion dressed up as a wall. And the terrifying, liberating consequence is this. Whatever you think your maximum is, school, work, the gym, the grief you think will end you, there's a strong chance you have more than half of yourself in reserve, untouched right now. The only way past the governor is straight through the thing you want to avoid. Stay hard. So he goes hunting for the wall on purpose. Death Valley. 135 miles of open road and temperatures that melt the soles of running shoes to the asphalt. A race called Badwater. He runs it, comes back, and runs it again, finishing on the podium against athletes who've done nothing but this their whole lives. And people watch him and reach for the easy explanation. He must be a natural, a freak of genetics. He hears it and pushes back hard, because it's the most dangerous myth there is. Talent, he says, is not required. In fact, talent can be a curse. The gifted often coast, and coasting is quitting in slow motion. What got a poor kid who couldn't read to the top of the ultra world wasn't a gift. It was volume. Unglamorous, unphotogenic, unrelenting work that nobody claps for. The miles run in the dark that no one sees. Which raises the harder question. Once you've reached the top, can you stay there? Anyone can catch fire for one season. The rare thing is refusing to cool down. David has a phrase for it: uncommon amongst the uncommon. Being uncommon is being the hardest worker in an ordinary room. That's hard enough. But he wanted more. To walk into a room where everyone is already elite, everyone is already a wolf, and still be the one who does more. A wolf surrounded by wolves. You can see it in Army Ranger School. 69 days of controlled misery. He attacks so completely that he's named the top enlisted soldier in the entire course, dropping 56 pounds along the way. Not to win a title. To answer his own question, when I'm surrounded by the best, do I fold or do I rise? It's the same test as that bathroom mirror, just with a harder audience. And the answer, over and over, is the same. But even wolves fail. And David's next great lesson would come not from a victory, but from a very public defeat. He decides to break a world record, most pull-ups in 24 hours. Thousands upon thousands of them. And the first attempt is a disaster. On live national television, cameras rolling. His body simply quits on him. Millions watch him fall short. He tries again in another city, fails again, hands torn open, hundreds short of the number. 2 public failures. For most of us, that's the end of the story, the part where we decide it wasn't meant to be. David does something colder and smarter. He treats each failure like an investigation. What exactly broke? The grip, the setup, the pacing. He runs an autopsy on his own defeat, line by line. No ego, no excuses, only data. Failure to him isn't the opposite of success. It's the raw material of it. Every collapse hands you a blueprint for the next attempt, if you're brave enough to study it instead of hide from it. So he studies, he changes everything, and he books a 3rd try. 3 in the morning, a small gym, a pull-up bar. David Goggins alone with a number that has beaten him twice. This time, he'd redesigned the whole approach from the wreckage of the last 2. And rep by rep, hour by hour, hands wrapped, shoulders on fire, he climbs. Past the point of the first failure. Past the point of the second. Deep into the second day, he pulls himself over the bar one more time and breaks the record. 4,030 pull-ups in 17 hours. Sit with the shape of that. The record wasn't built on the 2 successes he'd had. It was built on the 2 failures. They were the plan. The humiliation on live television wasn't the thing standing between him and the record. It was the thing that made the record possible. And you'd think a man who could do that must have the strongest body alive. You'd be wrong. Because the whole time, David was carrying a secret in the one muscle that never gets a day off. Doctors find it late, a hole in his heart, a defect he'd been born with, quietly feeding his body a fraction of the oxygen everyone else runs on. Every hell week, every 100-mile night, every 1,000th pull-up, done on a broken engine at maybe half power. It takes surgery, and when the first one goes wrong, a second, just to give him the heart the rest of us started with. And then, cruelest of all, a mystery illness begins wasting him away. Strength drains out of him. And this man who conquered everything lies on a bed genuinely believing he is dying, at 38, with the lights going down. Here is where the story you expect would end on despair. It doesn't. Lying there, certain it's over, David feels something he'd been too armored to feel his whole life. Peace, gratitude, and forgiveness. For the town, for the hate, for the father who terrorized a little boy in a big house. He lets all of it go. He doesn't die, but something in him finally, fully lives. The war with himself is over. So look at the whole distance. A terrified boy performing fine to survive. A 300-pound man frozen on a couch. And the person he chose to become instead, not handed to him by talent, not rescued by luck, but built, one brutal, honest day at a time. Everything traces back to a fogged mirror and a decision to stop lying. The accountability mirror to face who you are. The cookie jar to remember what you've survived. The 40% rule to call your quitting point what it really is, a suggestion, not a wall. And underneath all of it, calluses, laid down over every wound he stopped hiding and finally healed. He would tell you none of this was about becoming a SEAL or a record or a legend. It was about becoming someone who cannot lie to himself anymore. That's the whole secret. So here's the mirror, turned toward you. What are you at 40% of? And what would you do with the 60 you keep pretending isn't there? Stay hard.